Over the months of August and September, Hot Topics will be following a series called Can Christians? In this series, Hot Topics will once again invite guests to hear from them on a range of somewhat taboo and controversial topics. In this series, we will not be prescribing specific answers to questions such as, can Christians have sex before marriage? Can Christians drink alcohol? Can Christians have a relationship with ancestors? Can Christians get tattoos? And many more. Instead, we will seek to explore these topics and equip you with the necessary tools to contemplate and respond ethically to taboo topics. Your host team for this series, Hloni, Rebekah, and Ilse. Good evening and welcome to another week of Hot Topics. We are so excited that you could join us this evening. We have an extremely hot topic tonight and we're going to be unpacking it further. Tonight's question is, can Christians watch porn? And I think the immediate assumption of Christians who've grown up in the church is no ways. But I think over time, and I think Hloni will be able to attest to this, and Haley, about young people and how the ideas shift from no to maybe sometimes. So we're just going to go around the room. We're going to introduce ourselves, then we're going to allow our guests to introduce themselves.
Great. Good day to everyone that's joining us. My name is Hloni, part of the Hot Topics team, but today I participate as part of the panel. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Ilse. Tonight we are joining with our guests as we host this conversation on can Christians participate in porn or watch porn. So it's great to have you joining us.
Hi, my name is Rebekah, and just tonight hosting this talk, and so excited to be speaking about this topic.
Hi everyone, my name is Mokhomotsi Dutlileng. I'm a minister in the Methodist Church in Edenvale. I'm privileged to come and share in this topic. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Haley Walker. I'm a master trainer in protective behavior Southern Africa and work closely in abuse prevention. So really grateful to be here tonight with a tough topic.
Amazing, thank you so much. So both of you work with young people or have worked with young people. What has maybe before we go into it, what has your experience been with young people? Maybe not just specifically around porn, but relationships, love, porn, I suppose about porn as well. So just like, how do you view how relevant this specific topic is, and how much have you engaged with it? I know, Haley, it would be a lot. So maybe just giving a bit of an overview of how you've seen it expand and just grow, I suppose, with millennials and probably Generation Zs, but yeah.
Well, with regard to the topic, in my experience, look, young people are very much exploring in their nature. They would want to explore, ask questions, and push the boundaries and test things. And therefore, pornography is something that they would want to look at it and just test it. And young people, I'm talking here particularly with teenagers. They are at a stage where their bodies are changing, their hormones are raging, their psychologically they are developing. They're at a stage of development, and therefore they are trying to find themselves and find who they are. And as part of that, there would be an exploration in the pornographic space. And therefore, you would expect that they would have an interest in that. But more than that, pornography is linked with sex. And sex is a big topic for young people. And therefore, you would expect that it's something that they would be very interested in. And actually, even as young as 9 or even earlier, they begin to explore pornography.
I've been working with children for well over 20 years now, and it's been interesting for me to watch the progression. So probably about 8 years ago was my first major exposure in terms of teens and pornography, working on understanding your identity and self-worth and sexuality and that kind of thing on a youth leadership camp. And the highlight there for me was this perception of only boys use porn. and more than half the girls then admitted to having used porn and been exposed to porn in this one group. And these were youth leaders. These weren't just any teenagers. And then going beyond that with our work in protected behaviours in schools. I think the biggest reality check for me over the last 2 years was last year when I was working with a group of grade 3s, so 9-year-olds. And we were talking about public and private and feeling safe and unsafe. And I had asked a question about how would you feel if somebody took a photo of you or asked to take a photo of you? And when the child turned to me at 9 years old and said, "What kind of photo do you mean?" I had to play dumb and say, what could it be? And at that point, he was talking about the fact that he had been exposed to pornography, been asked for explicit imaging. And I turned to the group and I said, who else? And the entire class put up their hands. So a group of 62 children at the age of 9 had already been asked for sexually explicit images or had been sent stuff. And that was kind of a slap in the face to say, we've got to start talking differently and we've got to start being more proactive in the way we're working around pornography.
I feel so naive that I'm shocked at everything that you both have said, because in my own mind it's been like, oh, surely at 16 when girls' and boys' hormones are raging, maybe that's when you start exploring, porn and what it could be. But it just proves that our naivety as a society. Hloni, just to throw it to you, you're the youth pastor here, and I know that you've done a series on love, sex, porn, and all of that. And how did you find that? Was it, especially speaking about it in a church space? I think there are a few words, like if you say sex, you see everybody kind of their face drops, or if you say porn or stuff like that. And I think that's also, we were speaking about the deliverables on this series, is that taking taboo topics and no longer having them be taboo. So what was the reaction like with your youth?
So I think maybe just to give a bit of background, is the reason we started doing the series is while we're doing another series that was related to sex and other stuff, we learned that there were girls whose pictures had been leaked on Instagram already, within our community. So dealing with a case like that, that on its own really raised our alarms, to say these are the kind of things that our young people are exposed to. But then, so what we then did is we had a series, but we used colors from a popular porn site in order to kind of brand this particular series. And in doing that, what then happened is we just put it up there, kids came in, and when they saw it, some of them reacted, some of them just played dumb. Yeah. But eventually we asked them, and you could see these grins, all these kids were exposed to it. And what actually almost, the conservative Hloni almost came out when we spoke about it, and some of them said, but there is recreational porn. And they told me that there's 26 plus genres of porn. Some are good and some are toxic. And one would imagine that when you go into the topic we've already decided that everything there is toxic, and yet porn has become so broad, it's developed so much that it is not necessarily, when it comes to teenagers, they don't just see it as something that is toxic, but in it, there are genres that are toxic and there are those that they consider to be good. Wow. And that's just when I realized how far behind I was on the topic.
Like organic porn, I saw a friend of mine the other day put something up on Instagram after all the Pornhub about the sex trafficking came up, and she listed a girl, which is as well something that we're going to dive into later. She listed like something called organic porn, where it doesn't use women and that women are paid. And I just couldn't also believe it, that there were these so many different genres exactly of porn. But yeah.
So maybe the first question that we can ask tonight is, what is it about porn that makes it so addictive? What is it that makes it so attractive to teenagers? And what is it about porn that makes it so dangerous?
Can I maybe start with that?
Yes.
Having just come off of the Nkosi Summit, a lot of research is going around the impact of porn on the brain. And I always sit and I say to young people, how many of us would willingly choose to become a cocaine addict or a heroin addict? Because porn has exactly the same impact on the brain. The difference is the first hit of porn is enough to turn us into an addict. Particularly with our young people, because of the way the brain is developing and the impulse centers of the brain not fully developed. So porn is created in such a way to create the same dopamine high as most drugs create. And so if you look at a user of porn in terms of brain scans and things, the brain lights up in exactly the same way as heroin and cocaine. And when we start to understand that, we start to recognize how dangerous it really is. Because immediately that dopamine feels good. And young people are naturally looking for that high. And so they respond to it, they don't understand what they're responding to, and they start looking for more. But it works in the same way as any other addiction. When we're working with drugs, it's more and more of the same drug or something stronger. Pornography is more and more pornography, but more and more types of pornography. And so the whole thing of organic porn and all of that, it's kind of the gateway, because the addiction kicks in quite early. And so you will need different genres and different types of things in terms of getting that same dopamine high out of pornography. And when we start to understand that, we realize how dangerous pornography actually is in terms of addiction. The other problem is, if we look at drugs, you go to a street seller and you've got to buy drugs. So you've got to physically have the money or something to sell, to go somewhere where it is dangerous and kind of connect with a person to get those drugs, whereas pornography is right in our homes. It's right on our devices, and it doesn't have to cost any money. And so the risk is even higher, because it can be done without anybody knowing about it. And that's what we're seeing with our young people, is it's coming into them. And many of our little ones who are getting caught in the addiction of porn, and I've worked with grade 7s and grade 6s who are addicted to porn, who are accessing porn 3, 4, 5 times a day because they feel the need to function. The thing is that the first exposure was often accidental, but the way their brain responded hooked them immediately.
That's incredible. Thank you, Haley. Mohammed, maybe the same question for you, if you've got something to add on that. Otherwise, maybe as well on the damage that porn does to individuals and relationships and also society and the effects it has on society.
I think that there would be very few people that would honestly argue against the negative impact of a toxic pornography. I've just learned a new term now, talking about ignorance. But there would be, no one would really argue honestly and persuasively against the negative impact of it on the mind, on your sexual relations at the later stage, how it cuts your creativity and just desensitizes you, and all the sorts of things. I mean, there's good work of research that has been done in that space. But maybe when discussing this, it would be of value that we go a few steps back and ask the question, how did we get here? Because unless we understand how did we get here, we will not be able to take ourselves out of the situation, all right? And I think we need to take responsibility as society in terms of how we expose our children to material on TV that is exposing them to pornography. How easily accessible we have made as a society that kind of material available on the internet, on their phone. Like Haley is saying, you really don't have to make an effort to get, you really don't have to. And therefore, we need to get down to the issue of the kind of parents we have become, the kind of education that is going on in our private homes, in our schools, in our churches, in society in general, the kind of influences we expose our children to. I honestly don't blame children here. I blame the parents' generation. And I'm sure their generation would blame the parents' generation, and so it goes. But it goes even deeper. When we've got to then look at our views about sex and the human body. And this thing touches on, I'm speaking here from a perspective of a minister, a spiritualist, and a pragmatic really here. Let 3 areas that I want to show you, and we don't have time to really go into them. But the first one would be to trace it back from the biblical perspective, trace it back into the African cultural societies, look at the animal kingdom, and lastly, look at the behavior of a human being whilst they are still a child. Something has gone wrong in these 4 areas. We need to go as far back as all that because we have sexualized a naked body as a society. And we are reaping the fruits of our stupidity and pervertness. Maybe let me stop there.
Sure, I'm astounded at everything that you both have said. It's a learning experience completely. I think certainly for Ilse and I, well, for myself, let me just speak for myself here. And I love how you're saying that we need to go back to the generations, to our parents' parents, and our parents' parents. And it's so easy to almost throw the blame off. And I think, Hloni, this is. It wasn't you, it was a different youth pastor that I knew, but basically a parent had caught their child, their girl child, watching porn, and I think the reaction was completely overwhelming because it was a girl, first of all, and secondly, because it was porn. And they said to the youth pastor, "What are you going to do about it?" As if it was the youth pastor's responsibility to now ensure that this child doesn't watch porn. You have 1 hour a week with your kids on a Sunday. How do you handle how do you handle knowing probably that a few of your youths would be watching porn? And how do we create this to not be a taboo topic? How do I leave this place, and how do I inform people that they stop being naive, they stop being ignorant, and instead of shaming people around watching porn or had watched it or been exposed to it, how do we begin a conversation where it's, "Mom, Dad, I've seen this thing. It did something to my body. How do I do this?" Without parents freaking out, being like, "Oh, yeah, I've said enough." Hloni.
Sure. Look, I think the first thing, Mkhumudzi touched on something very important, and that is our unwillingness as the church to speak about sex. I think Paul said something very important on the first week we had him. He said, for some weird reason, we've got this image that if I speak about sex, it's as though someone is seeing me naked and they're seeing me having sex. But I'm actually just speaking about it. That's the first thing. So I think the church doesn't want to speak about sex. And the reason most teenagers end up coming across porn sites is because they desperately want to learn about sex. Things are happening to their body. They're developing, they're growing things, but there is no one to actually speak to about sex. I'll give you an example. My old man, we laugh about it now. How my dad taught me about sex is he came back one day, I was 18. He came with this packet, with this condom that had instructions around sex, a manual around sex, that this is how you love the next person. And he gave it to me, and he looked away and walked out the room. I looked at it, and out of excitement as a teenager, I wanted to go show my friends. Like, look at what my dad gave me, So I went out, and my mom says immediately when I left the house, he was like, "Look, he's now gone to use it. It was not a good idea." And my daughter, but what I'm getting to is we do not know how to have normal conversations around sex. The only times that teenagers have conversations around sex is when they're sexting or when they're recommending porn sites to each other. We do not know how to engage around sex. And I think that is a fundamental thing we need to do. I know from some developmental lessons around kids that they are taught around their sexuality. That's okay. Normalizing the idea of saying I've got a son, normalizing the idea of myself to my own son, to saying, listen, this is your private part, no one touches you there, from something as simple as that, to then saying as a teenager that, hey, but you'll notice changes are happening here, but all of that. So that's the first thing. I think firstly the church, but also the church needs to equip the home space to have conversations around sex. That is the first critical thing. We need to equip the home space. But then even secondly and lastly from my side is then to say, we need to then teach people how to genuinely love each other. I always say and I'm always biased to the guys because I'm a guy, and I always say to the guys, look, gents, the tragedy of porn is that it equips you from the ability to engage, or rather to have normal relationship with women. And one day you go into the corporate space, you see a woman, you've sexualized her body so much that you can't even network with her. The first thing you are seeing is a potential sexual encounter that takes something away from you, because then you can't engage with people at a normal level and realize what could come out of this relationship. But the first thing you have in mind is, hey, potential encounter.
Can I maybe chip in there? I think one of the things we're seeing with pornography, and the research is showing, is that 80% of pornography is violent against women. And it doesn't include consent. And it doesn't include discussions around what is wanted by both parties. And so our young people are using pornography as an education. However, it's a really unhealthy education, because it isn't giving us a loving sexual relationship. What it's showing is abuse and aggression and non-consensual acts. And what we're hearing from young people over and over again, teenagers, where girls are expecting to allow that kind of thing to happen to their bodies because that's what people do. On the other side, guys who are perpetrating violence against women because that's the education they've had. So if we don't, as the church, start talking about loving relationships, healthy sexual relationships, where does that narrative change? How many of the adults in our homes, if we look at the state of family, how many of our adults in our churches actually know enough about that information to educate the kids? We need to really find constructive ways of working with both the parents and the young people to have those conversations.
I'm actually so glad that the conversation has led this way, because around consent, and especially in South Africa, where we're experiencing extreme gender-based violence, so I was just doing a little bit of research around porn, and I had to make sure that my search bar was research related, because every time I put up, so I typed the other day, statistics on porn sites came up, because it was a teacher giving statistics about porn. It was just it has become so perverted that I couldn't even research what I needed to research without having explicit content pop up on my computer. Last year, a 15-year-old girl was raped on camera, and it was uploaded to Pornhub. The year before, a 14-year-old girl was raped, and it was uploaded onto Pornhub. And just over here, it took months for Pornhub to take it down. So it wasn't like it was reported to the police and it was taken down. It took months because they were finding loopholes in which this video could remain on the website. How do we react first of all, as a society, but how do we react as a church? Because I can hear it now, young people going, they're so old, they're so conservative, how can they say, oh, this is just porn, it doesn't hurt anyone? Whereas actually, we're not liberal or conservative on this. The truth is, rape is wrong, porn is wrong, and so how do we speak into that space of rape and abuse?
I think our response as the church should be going back to teaching the true gospel of understanding our bodies and sex. Yeah. Guys, sex is not perverted naturally. It is God-given. It is the ultimate expression of love. Nothing as beautiful as sex. But we need an adult, mature teaching around sex. But also the issue around our bodies as people. When you when you look at how we react to a body, we're talking about having sexualized, particularly a woman's body. But in actual fact, in terms of the Word of God, we understand that in the beginning, when innocence still ran the life as God had ordered it, human beings were walking around naked. And when you read, you find it in Genesis 3 that it came after two things happened to this thing called the religion. After shame and fear. And we became a religion of fear because what happened it is that in the myth on Genesis chapter 3, after they ate that fruit, then we are told they felt ashamed. So shame crept in because they were naked. Before that, there was nothing wrong with their bodies. And then later on, in the same chapter, it speaks about when God was inquiring, where are you? Why are you hiding? And the answer was, we were afraid. We heard you coming, we were afraid. So shame and fear characterized a naked body. Because then, from that point, we began to look at a naked body not just as a beautiful feature that God had given, but we began to have perverted ideas of what it is. There is nothing wrong with our bodies, guys. Actually, as we sit around here, let's all be honest. Yeah. Who doesn't know what is behind my zip? All of us, we know, right? And actually, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, except the fact that we have some evil idea of just, brutalizing, using power against them and all that. You look at African communities. I have asked all black African cultures, people, the vendors, the Tsongas, I'm Motswana, Basotho, Mazulu, Maswati, all of us, when a child is young, girls and boys used to walk naked. Just naked. All that we have in all those cultures is to cover the front bit. It's only the Tsongas who cover the front and the back. But all of us, generally, we cover the front bit. And the skirt is so small. And nothing in our upbringing that used to say there is something sexual about that. Yeah. We used to have reed dance and all that. I mean, we are on Swaziland's case and KwaZulu-Natal with their reed dance. But when you look at that, it is just a perverted mind of somebody that has sexualized the body. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You look at the animal kingdom. Animals walk around with their naked body. It's only human beings, a cat, a dog, a cow, nothing. They walk around, they are free. We are the only species that God has created that has turned itself around so bad that we had to cover our beautiful bodies. And that is where we need to go as the church and help them understand that actually you don't look at the body of your sister or your brother like that. Yeah. That you look at as the image of God, as the likeness of God, as the beauty of nature. And if we begin to look at that, it will be amazing, amazing, amazing.
I think just from what Mokhomutsi has said and what Haley spoke about in terms of the power dynamics that come with porn, there's a book that I was reading while doing other courses. I'm very passionate about justice and liberation, so most of the material that I read has to do with that. But then it speaks about the dynamics of power in how we treat the human body, analyzing it through a slave. But if you look at it even within porn culture, that you can find that power is also implicated. Because if I take someone's body, in order to get it to a point where it can be objectified, to the point that it can just be a pawn in my game, or I can commodify it, I need to first dehumanize it. Mm-hmm. And that is the process that we find with Sarah Baartman's body, for instance. Yep. where she is dehumanized to the point that she's taken, even when she dies one day, her body parts are taken and they're placed in a museum for people to see that. And these are remains that were only retrieved back in 1985, a couple of years back, not so long ago. And this just shows you how much we have perverted the human body. But the perversion does something to our brains. If I see the next woman as a sexual object, they have ceased to be a full human in my eyes. I've done something to them. I have stripped them of their humanity. And that is what porn does. When you watch porn, it dehumanizes the next person, and they cease to become a human being in your eyes. And that is just some of the dangers.
Absolutely. No, I think you touched on the commodification of, bodies and people, and maybe we just want to add to that, to our conversation so far, is the human trafficking aspect of porn as well. Is that's literally taking a body and often selling it. And even in research, you find that people say, or just if you listen to the conversation, some people say, but it's not forced. Porn isn't forced. They're being paid for it, regardless of that.
Yeah.
A researcher I was listening to was saying, force doesn't have to always mean a gun to the head. Sometimes it can be the need to pay your rent. So how does this culture of pornography and the effects it has on our society and the dependence of our society on it, how does it fuel toxic practices such as human trafficking and other things as well?
I think one of the things I always say is we can't be against slavery and human trafficking if we use pornography. Because so many of our people who are the actors, and there's no other way of calling it, in pornography are the victims of human trafficking and slavery. They are being pimped out, whether it's because they are absolutely desperate to put a meal on their table, or because they are being held against their will. And unfortunately, the more people use pornography, the more it drives the demand. We work quite closely in the human trafficking space, and it is our biggest risk. It is where the vast majority of people who are stuck in human trafficking are used and abused. When we did the summit a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that was hard to hear was the number of families that are trafficking their own children and young people in the manufacturing of porn. The number of young people who are trafficking each other in the manufacturing of porn. One of the things that came out during that summit was that with online behavior at the moment, some of the perpetrators are saying that they can actually get a child to create pornography within 6 hours. That's how quick the grooming is. There's no payment that's happening. It's pure coercion and then blackmail. We can't carry on like that. We can't allow that kind of thing and be the church and say that we love people and we care about people and that there is value in the human body. So if we look at the statistics, it's actually quite frightening. Very few people are earning a livable, sustainable income out of creating pornography, and most of them are consenting in some respect. The one document I was reading, it's like they consent to A, but B and C also happens. And so yes, maybe they agreed out of desperation or whatever else it is, but all the acts that happen are not consented to. And so it's a massive, massive challenge in the industry.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to, there's two things I wanted to say. Recently, I've Instagram, and I used to watch a program. It was like a series called Glee, and one of the actors on it absolutely loved them. And then a few years ago, he was arrested. Glee's like a teenagers program, so it's quite young. He was arrested for hoarding child pornography, and he got a prison sentence and everything that needed to happen. How do we protect our children? And I'm not saying just in the physical sense, because, I mean, we see how fast things happen. But how do we protect our children? How do we as a church actually make a stance and make a stand against this? And I suppose it's against gender-based violence, and it's against, and let me not be sexist here, it's against men viewing women in the light that Hloni was speaking about, but it's also women viewing men in an over hyper-sexualized way. Because it's very quick to say that men over-sexualize women, which I do agree with. I think it's terrible how men cannot wear a shirt, and as soon as a girl takes her shirt off, it's this massive Instagram. You can have a shirt off if you're a man, but as soon as you're proud of your body and as a woman, it gets removed. But that's a different topic for a different day. But and I've seen it, how women magazines will over-sexualize men and say like the most ridiculous things. So how do we hold the gender-based violence, the way we over-sexualize men, the way we over-sexualize females, how do we today go, it's enough as a church?
Can I start by challenging your definition in terms of child pornography? There is no such thing as child pornography. There's child sexual abuse material. No child can consent to sexual activity. And so there's a big drive legally to change it to CSAM, or child sexual abuse material. So if we're going to talk about these kinds of things as the church, it's fitting within the legislations and things that are already in place, that children can't consent to sexual activity because of where their brain is, where their development is. They're not ready to have those kinds of relationships. But then beyond that, what are we as the church advocating for? Are we activists? Are we proactively taking action, and not from a naive, conservative, abstinence almost perspective? Let's get down to the real issues, the human rights issues, the violations against people. Because isn't that what we're called to as Christians? To stand up for the weakest and the youngest and the lowest in our communities. And so for me, as somebody who is an advocate and activist against abuse in all its forms, I cannot stand by and hear or watch or see or be part of anything that allows that kind of activity to happen. And for me, that's part of what God's called me to be, is somebody who stands against what happens to the lowest, the weakest, the most vulnerable in our society. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. It doesn't make us popular. But I do think part of that is then how we teach around sexuality. And what we're doing now is not working. It's not good enough, and it's not working.
For me, it lies in 3 areas. The first area is parenting. I cannot change a community, even less a nation or the world, but I can influence my 3 boys. Wow. That I can do with ease by making sure that the conversations that we have in our home is life-giving, by making sure that I kill the tendency to have gender bias against women in my house, by making sure that my television is used for developmental nurturing program watch, by making sure that my behavior as a parent, my conduct that my children are exposed to, sends a positive message. So our biggest problem in the world at the moment, guys, it's parenting. That is where you get crime, that's where perverts are formed, that's where murderers are nurtured. Parenting gone wrong. One of the biggest issues that we've got to deal with is parenting. So teaching at a parental level. The second level is the church that must take and step into the space of teaching in a big way. Discipling people, teaching people to be able to understand, to want to reach their higher selves. And develop in that way, in the spirituality. And you cannot do that by shouting from the pulpit every Sunday. It needs deep, authentic, slow, intentional teaching. So in the next decade that is rising, if we are going to make progress on this, churches must really be teaching centers where youth pastors and ministers and those that are in the children's space will go down into the space of teaching. And the relationship between the teacher, the pastor, and the parents the gap needs to be closed. Because what Hloni and Haley are teaching in Sunday school or wherever, I need to reinforce in my living room. And that is where this thing needs to be. Thirdly and lastly, really we need to help our children to know that there is a higher purpose that God has created them for, and to run towards actualizing and realizing that purpose. Because when you have evolved in a way that to the height that which God wants us to evolve to, the issue of sex and sexuality, the bodily pleasures almost disappear. The edges disappear. The thing that we are having this topic here today tells you how primitive our society is. Yeah. We think we are advanced, we think we are sophisticated. Guys, we are primitive, very primitive. Sometimes I think we beat animals at it, you know. And we need to evolve. So our next project or program actually as the church and the home front needs to building the evolution process of the human psyche, the human soul, the human mind to a higher level. Technology is coming. What we have here is basically picnic stuff. Wait until we are in full-blown fourth industrial revolution where we will be making these things. Then you will realize that we are in big trouble. So it becomes a crisis when you have technology evolving faster than the creators of the very same technology, which is human beings. So we need to evolve, we need to teach, we need to parent. Then we nip this thing in the bud.
And I think just from my side, in parting is just one, when we find our place in the margins, when Jesus goes to the margins of the Temple of Jerusalem, he does not only just comfort those who are oppressed, who are rejected, who are excluded from worship, but he also turns the tables upside down of those who are the oppressors, those who are creating the injustice in that space. And as the church, one, definitely, we need to find our place in the margins, be there for those who are victims of human trafficking, be there for the prostitute, be there for the porn star. We need to be there for them, not demonize them, not demonize the person. Be there for them, but at the same time, we must not forget to speak out against those who are perpetrators of this injustice. And this means standing up to big mobs, standing up to people with real power in this country. And for me, that's the only way we're going to get this right.
Absolutely. And I think just as we start to wrap up this conversation, just to highlight that even though I think all of us were on one page here to say that pornography is not something that is for us as Christians. But that being said, we cannot ignore those that have taken part in pornography, those that have watched it. We are infinitely valuable to God, still as fallen creations. I mean, we often see rescue attempts throughout our Bible, how God reaches into the worst societies, reaches people at their worst and still says, you are a value to me. And I think that's maybe something for us to take away, just as Rebekah wraps up for us for tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that both of you actually brought that in, because I think it is very easy to demonize what we see on TV, or when watching porn. And I guess what our naive understanding is of porn, it's so easy to demonize the woman or to demonize the man and say it's them, but actually it's a massive puppet show. And like you said earlier, so many women are involved completely unconsensual, and I think to pray for them is also just not enough. What you've said, Haley, and I think what both of you guys have said, has just been, we have to be activists. We have to actively, I just love what you say about parenting as well, is that it's not it's not just the church's problem, it's all of our problems, parents, siblings, everyone. So just thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you for
Pleasure.
clearing up your time. And we just, honestly, I was just so blessed and privileged to be able to have had this time with you. So join us next week, Tuesday. We'll be having our hot topics discussion. This happens on Tuesdays, where we'll be taking this specific topic. We'll be going a little bit deeper on Zoom. If you have questions, and also if you have kids and you have questions around that and how you navigate that specific phase in your life, please join us, and we'd love to have you there. But for this evening, have a great evening, and we'll see you next week, Tuesday. Goodbye.